Hey guys, Cameron Luther, 356sc.com here. Now we're doing a different kind of a project. This is a 1968 Series 1.5 E-Type for a client. It's in for mechanical restoration. The Series 1.5 was at the very end of the Series 1 line, with the only differences being non-covered headlights, and the rocker switches in the center are the plastic, thicker style like a Series 2, rather than the smaller style of the Series 1 that are very sexy 60s looking. So I'll show you the whole car, but it retains a lot of the Series 1 features, like the Series 1 taillights and rear end, that are very quintessential, rather than the very flat Series 2. This car is very solid cosmetically, as you can see. No rust or anything like that. It's been repainted. It's had some interior restoration done, just seat covers and a couple other small things, but a very solid car with a lot of originality to it, and just mechanically it needs full restoration, so that's what we're gonna do. So the first thing I did on this E-Type was assess it mechanically, as well as cosmetically. The owner wanted to kind of have a report as to the condition, and went through and studied the different finishes, the floors, things like that. Very solid car. One of the things I did was, the engine was thought to be locked up, as it is, and put a borescope down the cylinders and found that some cylinders had corrosion, some had coolant type materials. So overall, definitely going to need to pull it apart and at least clean it, and probably do some other work while we're in there. So what we're going to do today is start to disassemble things like the cooling system and the fuel system with the carburetors and radiator and things like that, and pretty soon we'll be ready to pull the engine out. So at first glance, when you see this rear end, you see E-Type Jaguar 4.2. Okay, so Series 1 looking taillights. You figure, all right, 65 through 67, Series 1 4.2 Roadster. And based on this view, you wouldn't be wrong. But where you can tell differences, obviously I pointed out the headlights, and then in the interior here, these rocker switches are a la Series 2, but in this case a Series 1.5. There are some non-factory items found in the interior here. Aftermarket head unit, Motolita 70s 80s style steering wheel, and an aftermarket shift knob. At least the wheel and head unit will be changed. The shift knob, not quite sure yet, but those will come after we redo the engine. So expect nothing much to change here momentarily, at least. A very, very sharp car. Pulling the hood off was no small feat. These E-Type hoods can weigh hundreds of pounds, and effectively what you do here is you take a bolt out, and around that bolt is a sleeve that sits between the bolt and the sleeve in the hood, and you pull that out, and then it comes loose from that side. So pulled those two and had a couple friends help me pull it off, and it's sitting right there currently. We're going to sit it up on its side behind the car once I can get a couple more hands. So today, what we're going to start with is pulling off the air filter. I've already popped these here. Need to undo a couple bolts, and taking off some electrical components like the alternator, and starting to look at taking apart the cooling system and other items like that. Now, something that we want to focus on, especially when taking apart this E, and any car really, that you're kind of getting into a major project, or even something minor like pulling off the carburetors and rebuilding them, is you want to stay organized. There's many ways to do this, but in the restoration field, the kind of standard is called bagging and tagging. So I'll show you an example. You take a Ziploc bag and try to buy Ziploc bags with labels on the front, or add your own labels and label exactly what part it is, and even if it's on a certain side of the car, anything like that. That way, when you go to put the car back together, you're putting on the exact same parts. And not only is this important to stay organized, but if a car has original finishes and say bolts on one side or that were higher or lower than each other, corroded in a different way over the years, and you're leaving those original finishes as you should, then it's great to have them back in place so that everything looks congruent. So we'll do that on this car. Loosen these nuts, just pull them off here. They have 2 washers. Important to note the order of the washers to keep it all together. Here are these bags that have labels on the front. Very helpful. And with that, I've got the clips off of the top of the filter canister, and this should pop off. Nice. Okay, nice clean original finish. We'll leave that alone, at least for now. Here's the filter. A little bit of corrosion and stuff in there, and we'll pull it apart, check it out. But so far looking so good. Just a little bit of dirt here and there. Don't see any evidence of ever a carburetor fire. Usually these are Stromberg side draft carbs, and the SUs, they were used earlier. You don't really hear about them having any problems with catching fire or even backfiring too much like you would with a Weber because of the sleeve design. That's not to say that you shouldn't still be cautious with them, but they are very easy to use reliably. So yeah, we'll start to disassemble this assembly here. All these linkages, noting obviously not a stock zip tie here, but we'll note the position of that to reference when we put things back together. Really interesting. This is where your fuel comes in. This is a kind of a hard plastic material fuel line, and this is a bowl that has a filter in the top half, and then things will get caught in the filter as well as in the bottom of the bowl and be separated out from the rest of the fuel supply, and then you can just twist it off like so with your fingers and clean it out. But if too much dirt comes through there, you may want to start looking at your gas tank, see if there's any corrosion within that. Just want to note here, as the car came in, it's missing this nut on the carburetor, something that will have to be ordered, but now we know the position of the one that's missing and what we need to get. So as we put it back together, we'll have a new piece of hardware right there. And you may ask, with that missing nut, well, it's not a big problem, right? It's just holding on the air filter. They got 2 others holding it on there and 3 there. No big deal. Well, the problem is when you go to tune the carburetors, this could cause a vacuum leak. So you have all your air flowing through here, and if there's a little bit flowing through there, getting them to balance with each other and getting the air fuel right can be totally tricky, especially as the design of these is that to enrich the carbs, the jet position moves, which is very different from a Weber, but nonetheless very hard to tune with a vacuum leak right there. So important to have all the hardware and have everything correctly fastened down. With all the nuts removed, we can loosen our screw for the PCV, positive crank ventilation, and pull that off. That whole assembly comes out, and we're ready to look at taking off the nuts for the carburetors right there and the linkages. There are 3 main pieces to focus on when taking off the carburetors: the nuts that hold it to the intake manifold, these linkages, and be sure to get their position before you take them off, and then the fuel lines. Now this T system here and these soft lines doesn't look stock to me. I know on the Series 1s they have a set of hard lines with a banjo style T. I don't know about the 1.5, so I'll have to do more research, but when we put it back together, it'll be corrected to the factory style set of lines. It may have used these same plastic lines up here, so we'll confirm and put it back together correctly. In order to remove this manifold here, this crossbar has to be taken off. So we have a separate bag for the hardware for that. Something to note here, these nuts come off, and this one pulled the stud with it. So we'll have to separate those two, put a small bit of Loctite on the lower threads and reinsert it when reassembling. With all the nuts taken off, the piece can be removed, the ports can be studied, and the piece will be labeled and put away. We've got the choke cables removed, the throttle linkage removed from the centers, fronts and back, vacuum line removed, fuel lines removed, and we're ready to take off the carbs. There they are. Check that out. We've got coolant material in the intake manifold, which makes sense because part of this intake carries coolant to the radiator. But interesting to see it pass over into there. You can see it's all crystalline. So here's the throttle plates. We'll have to do some research into that as to why that might have happened and how that could have led to the engine also being filled with the same type of coolant material. Next, we'll want to remove components of the ignition, being the coil, distributor wires, things like that, as well as the cooling system with the radiator and other pieces here. So we'll want to cut off these zip ties in order to give us access to take off all these electrical and cooling lines separately. So this car is running an aftermarket electric fan. The wiring is a little bit messy, so we'll clean that up at least. And when I try to pull this connector off, it split apart, so we'll have to correct that absolutely. This is a coolant expansion tank, overflow tank, reservoir. The earlier cars had them right here, but this is a series 1.5, so it has it there. I want to remove these as well. All along here in order to access removing that line from the system so we can pull this radiator out. We technically don't have to take the radiator off to remove the engine, but it just gives you more access to the engine mounts and things like that. And we have to drain it anyways, as the engine has to be drained of its coolant as well as its oil. Here's kind of a weird detail. Pulling off the bolts which connect the manifolds to the lower part of the exhaust. And the front ones were all fairly normal. The back ones, I noticed there's a bolt going down rather than studs like the others. And that actually has no nut on the bottom. The rest have a nut, or rather two nuts. Small and large one. In this position, you can see they are different sized inner diameters, which means this was simply being used as a spacer for some reason. So we'll have to correct that with correct factory style studs. So we're pulling off the manifold here. Wow, a little crusty in there, but not bad. That'll give us better access to the transmission bolts and the engine mount, honestly.
What are we finding here, Sir Cameron Luther III?
I don't know. Check out this exhaust port in the vacuum.
Whoa.
It's weird. It almost looks like a mouse house, or
Spray foam.
crystallized coolant, or I don't know what.
I don't know. Let's get it out.
Yeah.
Oh, there's like a gel in that one.
Yeah.
You just pull it back from the top.
Exactly like that.
Whoa.
Weird.
You got a screwdriver? Something to shove in there? Dude, is that gold?
Weird. I don't know. I'm kind of with
Okay, we've got the engine hoist set up. Not everything's removed yet. I just wanted to get an idea of spacing and everything. Gonna go ahead and take the water pump off for clearance here. So before I do that, took off the bracket for the alternator, and a very long bolt going in there, and 3 washers at the top. All right, so pulling the water pump off, and let's see, it's coming. A little bit of coolant, not as bad as I thought it would be. So we'll pull the hardware off one at a time and pull it. And note that these are long with a collar, and these are shorter with threads all the way. So I've taken the cam covers off. I'm going to go ahead and pull the head off the engine and then pull the block by itself. Took apart the front here. This piece was indexed to there, that flat edge you can see, and this piece here held it from spinning, and it sat inside there. Okay, so what I've done here is adjust the cam tensioner, chain tensioner wheel just enough so that these sprockets could come off the front of the cams. So now we can start taking off all the nuts and bolts for the head and pull it up.
Okay. It's off in the front. I got the side pumps.
Beautiful. Head's removed. Let's come take a look at the block.
Oh man.
I think that's rat turds.
Oh my god.
tasty.
Oh, I put the sauce in there.
Oh.
Okay, we're free there. That's it.
Cool.